compatible. But, Mr. Dressup it's a very weird, because I'm an immigrant to Canada, so I was 10 years old when I came here, and I couldn't speak a word of English. So Mr. Dressup was pretty much like...
That's going to be a question. You calm down.
He learned all his English from Finnegan.
That is literally one of my questions, sir.
All right, so welcome back. Welcome back to the conversation portion of our event. Again, for our online audience that's joining us, welcome to TAP Center for Creativity as part of TingFest, the post-conversation of our great screenings with Rob McCallum, Joe Haidar, and our wonderful host, Whitney South. So I'm going to hand it off to Whitney, who's going to run us through the conversation. Of course, we'll take questions both in-house and online. So hang on to those questions, and we'll make sure we get to them. Let's welcome our guests.
Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Really excited to be here with Joe and with Rob. We just watched their films, and they were absolutely amazing. There was a lot of crying. That might have just been me. Can we have some clapping if there was any other crying going on? That's just to make me feel better, so I really, really appreciate that. I'm going to start off with a really easy question for both of you, and I'm sure you've answered a million times, but these lovely people would love to know, how did you get into animation, film, and Rob, documentary film?
Go ahead. So as I was saying, I was an immigrant to Canada, came from the Middle East, and couldn't speak a word of English. But what I could do is draw. And the only way I could kind of make a friend is they say, that's the guy who can draw Superman without looking at him. So comic books were my big thing, and it was sort of my gateway drug. I didn't know animation existed. I watched it, but I didn't know that real human beings did this stuff. So it was very strange that by the time I made it to grade 13, back then, my art teacher happened to mention that there's a school that teaches animation when we were discussing an animated feature I had just seen. And I thought, oh my God, because at that point it was just like I had no idea what to do with my life. And I love to draw, and I couldn't imagine a day without drawing. So when he said there's an actual place that will teach you this art form, it was like a godsend. So I went to Sheridan College in Oakville and never looked back.
Excellent.
I got started into film by getting out of French class presentations, in which I had to basically read a story that I had to write in front of everybody, instead of having to go through that awful experience of reading another language, which you're probably familiar with or feel like. I said, well, can I just make a movie? And my teacher knew that it would be so much more work, and I'd still have to write it and essentially get it spoken out there. She said, sure. So my first 3 films were all in French, all parodies of Evil Dead, and done in high school. And just being able to work on something, put it together, and then show an audience, that was it. I went from wanting to be a lawyer to wanting to be a filmmaker and a storyteller, like that.
Dude, good call.
Yeah. Well, I still love the legal side of filmmaking, thankfully.
Wow.
And God knows with the documentary and that much archival stuff that you guys saw, we had to learn a little bit about it. But yeah, storytelling, 100% way to go.
So Joe, what was your journey then from Sheridan, which incidentally, that's exactly where I wanted to go for classical animation, but I was in that weird time where everything was shifting to CGI. I wanted to do classical, and so I kind of gave up on that dream because I thought I wouldn't be able to keep drawing. Yeah. How did you get from Sheridan to working for Disney?
Well, first of all, I'd always wanted to go to this magical place that I see on TV all the time, and I didn't know it was called California. We had a black and white TV, and I was watching all these, Adam 12 and, all the shows that were taking place. And I was like, I want to be in that place, like where Elvis Presley is dancing on the beach and, they're having beach blanket bingo. I hated the winters here, no offense, but it was just kind of like, I gotta find a way to get to that place. And after Sheridan, a lot of us were going to California, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. So a couple of my buddies were moving to England, And they said there's a lot of work in England, and being Canadian, we could kind of work there a little bit. So they said, do you want to come along? And it was just like, what, like that. I said, sure. So we flew, they had already flown ahead of me to London. So they were established by a few months. So when I arrived, they showed me where to throw my luggage. We went into a bed and breakfast for Australians, and we were all staying there. And literally the next day I had a job in animation. And in England at the time, it was a boutique studio that, it was a series of boutique studios that made commercials, and every animated studio had an artist that was sort of the style of the whole studio. So it was a great place to just jump from style to style to style. And while I was there, the word on the street was there's a big movie coming. Steven Spielberg and Walt Disney have gotten together, and they're making this movie called Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So you're hearing about this in the pubs, and I just said, I got to get on that movie. And I tried to find every piece of information to find out, and it was so easy. I just walked in, showed them my portfolio, and I got hired. No recruiters, no nothing. And that changed my life entirely, and I ended up going to California after that.
I feel like the combination of live action and animation kind of maybe left an impression on you, judging
did.
from the film we watched today.
It did. I mean, that movie changed everything for me, but it was also this idea that cartoon characters lived in Hollywood and were actors that just never left my mind. So it influenced that short, because when CGI took over hand-drawn animation, I thought, oh, all these cartoon characters are now unemployed. And my buddy and I discussed it and said, let's just piggyback off of Roger Rabbit and make that short. What are they now doing? And so we made it very dark and very adult, and not as nice as your film. And I thought it was just strange to see the two films together, but anyway, that's a different story.
So Rob, how did you go from Western and working on films to bigger films? And I know that you do a lot of crowdfunding, or you did a lot of crowdfunding. Was that a big part of it?
Yeah, I went to Sheridan as well for
No
postgrad.
way.
True
Oh
story.
my God.
Oakville. Lived right there off Marlborough Court. It happened. Monhans, Wings Place. Yep. So that's why we're paired together. And I
Connection.
did the postgrad thing, and then I helped sell camera gear. Wow. Again, not something I wanted to do, but it was paying the bills. Didn't want to be a PA. I was a PA on several music videos and commercials. Hated it. And I just kind of hated working for other people, because I didn't want to be in the union and the industry where I couldn't move that cable from there to there where we were going to shoot next, because it wasn't my department.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, it was taking long, and I could just see the dollars getting thrown away. And I thought, why am I doing this? I just want to do my own thing. So I just started writing, and that's where it's always been for me, just writing. Pencil, paper, storytelling, and then how do I get this story made from whatever capacity. And about 10 years ago, I got into documentaries, because after making a narrative with no money whatsoever and having 3 times the amount of CG shots that Jurassic Park had, I realized there's a limit to what you can do in a narrative. But documentary was much more forgiving on a budget, especially when you're doing observational verite stuff and talking heads. The curve is just so much smaller. And that's when I started building communities and looking into fan-driven projects and nostalgia as a way of, why are we looking back? Why was it important then? Why is it important now? And I wasn't the only one that cared about the good old days. No matter what age you were, everybody has an interest in looking back, because it's about who we are as well. What is our identity? And we're fascinated with looking back, because we're still trying to answer questions about ourselves today. So by looking back, we can get answers for who we are. And that's how those films happen.
We're going to talk later.
Okay.
Okay, I can just go. It's fine. I just want to revisit Roger Rabbit for 1 second, and I think that Rob can also maybe talk to this. The whole concept of having live action with animation was not new to Disney. It was Bedknobs and Broomsticks. It was Mary Poppins. What do you think it is about Roger Rabbit that left such a bigger impression maybe than those did?
Well, Roger Rabbit was innovative because it broke it broke the big glass ceiling that those other movies didn't, which is it allowed the live action director to move the camera freely. In the other films, the camera was locked for the most part. On Roger Rabbit, Richard Williams, who was the animation director, told Bob Zemeckis, the director, do whatever the hell you want and we will match it. So Bob just moved the camera the way he normally moved it. But every time he moves the camera, it put an enormous amount of burden on the animator. So like simple shot where a camera is just panning and you see cartoon characters standing. Those are drawings that have to be replicated over and over again and matched to the spot on the ground, a mark on the ground that we would find, and lock the characters in so that we can fake the pan. I mean, there were so many things like that, as well as when Bob Hoskins is pushing Roger through the doorway and you see an enormous amount of resistance. All that was done, they had to find puppeteering methods to do it, like a giant rubber band that he would push that we would draw over to make it look like Roger's holding the sides of the door and creating an enormous amount of resistance. So trying to make the live action, connect to the animation and the animation connect to the live action was an enormous challenge on that movie. And I've never seen anybody do it again as well with hand-drawn animation. And I recently just worked a couple of years ago on Space Jam 2, and it was a lovely film and I really enjoyed it, but I always thought, oh my God, with all the technology we have today, we couldn't replicate what we were doing with rubber bands and paper and popsicle sticks on that movie. I mean, it was all analog, there was no digital anything. We all just had paper and we just had to trace and rotoscope. And anyway, it was an insane movie, but it was a bunch of young people. I was 26 years old when I was on that movie, and everybody around me was the same age, and we were all transplants for the most part. There were Brits, but there were Europeans and Canadians and Americans, and we were all there in England working on this movie, and none of us had any life beyond that movie. So, I spent 13 months working almost 7 days a week. And back then, nobody cared, and there was no like HR saying, no, this is not right. It was tough. It was a really tough film, but man, it was great. And when we saw the finished result, it was just magic just to see how the animation was interacting with the live action. And we just thought, I mean, even we thought it was magic, and we were doing it. And Richard Williams was the real genius behind all that. He was working, and who, by the way, is a Canadian, who moved to England, and he started a studio that pretty much created a whole forest of studios. All the people that worked for him split off and created their own studio. So in the 1980s, it was this healthy place in the West End of London where you could just cross the street and it'd be another animation studio, another animation studio. And they're all different styles, and everybody's doing incredible work. And, just lucky to be there at that time.
It was a pretty intense project for one of your first
It was.
jobs.
I got yelled at a lot. And back then, nobody had any problems yelling at you in front of all your peers and just undressing you in front of them. You should not do that. And you're just standing there. It was a boot camp, but it toughened us up, and and then a few of us were asked to go to Disney in Burbank, and I was lucky enough to be one of them. So
I'm out of here. Going
Yeah.
to hang out with Elvis.
Didn't get to meet Elvis, no.
I wanted to know what Rob thought about the whole concept of Roger Rabbit being so different as well, because you and I were like 8. We were the kind of key demographic for that kind of thing. How did Roger Rabbit make you feel as a little kid watching him?
Wow. I mean, we talk about the legal implications of film. I mean, a film like that will never happen again.
Nope.
Even with as popular as shared universes are, you'll never have Disney characters share the screen with Warner Brother characters. But therein lies something special. As an 8-year-old who grew up learning opera music from Bugs Bunny,
Oh, nice.
and like, learning how to improperly, set up a stereo from Goofy in your home. Like all the life's lessons were learned from those two rosters of cartoon characters. So to see them merge together in one cinematic experience, that was an extension of my world, like you said, right?
Yeah.
When CG comes in, it's like, well, what happens to all these? Because when you think of Disney World as a kid, you think you're going to go meet the cartoon character. And you're presented with this mascot, which is not the real deal, but you convince yourself that it is the same character, but it's not quite. But you believe the magic so much it has to be. But here Roger Rabbit was like, oh, I get to see what's going on when they're not making their pictures and what their lives are. And boy, do I want to be friends with them even more.
So I'm going to ask Rob, how is it that you pick your ideas for your films? Because you have a lot of nostalgia, as you were talking about, with Nintendo Quest and Masters of the Universe, Grayskull.
Yep.
Oh,
Why do you pick those things?
That's what's cool, man. What's cool to me. What do I love regardless of anybody else? Because when you make a movie, you could spend a few years on it, right? You've got to have the passion to get up every day and spend hour after hour working on it. So it better be something you love. And, there was many years people said that He-Man was really stupid and like lame and all these things, but I still loved it. I didn't care. So of course it was on my checklist, my roster of films that I wanted to make. And especially when I said, documentaries, we definitely got to do a He-Man one. Love video games, got to do something on video games. Heavy metal, I love heavy metal. Here's an opportunity to direct a kiddie story. Got to do it, So there are a few things still on my list, of course, but like it's kind of just from who I am. Then I get to cover that in the films I make.
What do you think it is about 80s babies that we hang on to that nostalgia possibly more than any other generation?
I don't think it's 80s babies. I mean, you look at kids in the 70s watching Happy Days. It's the same kind of things. Look at why American Graffiti's popular, right? In 73. It's because they want that 50s culture. It's that time of coming of age. And we can go back and look at the time where we got to become who we are and have a sense of self and identity that wasn't just handed down to us from other people. It's that sense of discovery we had on our own, whether it's in front of the TV watching cartoons all by ourselves on Saturday morning, because that was our special time, or when we're out as a teenager learning who we are by going through the trials of life. I think it's probably a little bit different now. I think if anybody's born after the year 2000 and in like kind of the years that were coming up and they look back, I think it's going to be a little bit different because culture is so homogenized that it's not as unique. Style, fashion, music, media are all squished together because it's all inundating us. But from the 99 and earlier, everything is so distinct, right? I think the joke I like to make is, when The Wedding Singer came out, it was only like 8 years after when the film was released, yet in the 90s, it felt like, well, look at the 80s, it looks so different. But it was only an 8-year gap from when that film came out to the time period that they were portraying. Now, like, if you set a film in 2005, it practically looks the same as today because nothing has changed or evolved. So there's not much to look back on in that sense because you don't have those touchstones, those timeline markers.
It's all technology now. I mean, like when I look at my short film, he had a flip phone, and that just aged the film completely.
It's magical to me, though. It works for the film because, like 2D animation, it's of another time.
Right. Well, you're right. And obsolescence is what that theme of that movie was. We've tried to say anything that's obsolete is still relevant.
Yeah.
Including the music we chose and everything. But yeah, but we were told when someone saw our short film, oh, your film looks old because he's using a flip phone.
Yeah, but wait till 10 years, right? Because technology is magical, right? On Star Trek, they have the communicators like, oh, what is that thing? You don't understand it, but you know what it does. But that comes back around when something is so foreign that you can't identify it. Even if it's from the past, it becomes magical again.
Yeah, I mean, certainly people like, I collect a lot of, comic book art, as we see over here, and all that stuff to me is still magic. I mean, there's something about the work that was done in the past that ages well. And you, whether it's technology or artwork or films, I love looking at it and seeing it in the category that it belongs in. Like film noir, as we both seem to love. We have a film noir festival in LA that we go to for every year, and it's just amazing to watch these movies on the big screen again. And they still hold up. I mean, there's nothing about them that feels out of date or out of touch, because I can immediately put myself in 1955 and see that. And I think that people are missing out if they don't have that ability. You have to see movies and art in the context of the time that they were created, and then appreciate it more from now. But anyway, that's a different
Well,
subject.
it's funny that you say that, because films that also hold up, even though they were back in, well, I guess my youth, is, you know, Beauty and the Beast, Lion King, Mulan, Aladdin.
That's hilarious.
They're still so loved, and it doesn't. They age really, really well. And so, what do you think when you see those films that you worked on still as beloved today? And like,
It's a weird time capsule, because I look at them and they still seem like it was just yesterday that we made those films. And then I realize, oh my God, 30 years have passed? Like, how is that possible? Because I don't feel older than I did when I made any of the stuff that I did back then. But then at the same time, you hear somebody say, oh my God, that was part of my childhood. And I thought, oh, wow. We really, we weren't really thinking at the time that we were making them. Of course, we were making them for people to watch and enjoy, but you had no idea that how much people will still remember them 30 years later. And it's so gratifying to know that they're still holding up and that people enjoy them.
Not even that, though. What's cool for me is I have 2 kids. And so it's cool to give them the gift of the stuff that you've worked on, the way it impacted me, and pass that on to them. And with animation in particular, you don't have that barrier to entry that you have with, say, like the Maltese Falcon.
Right.
Because it's just easier to buy them because it's beautifully drawn, it's colorful, the score is there, and the story stands the test of time.
Animation definitely has the ability to cross a lot of different lines, and you don't have to do a lot to make the audience suspend their disbelief. So whereas a live action film could, you watching it and you just go, okay, that's taking me a little bit more effort to place myself in that world. But if it's done well, an animated film seems timeless, and I hope continues. But it's weird to think of movies that we worked on as classics, the way I used to look at Peter Pan and Cinderella and Fantasia and all those movies, Sleeping Beauty, which all of us were in agog. I mean, that's one of the weird
those landscapes.
It's the thing I loved about being at Disney is everybody there had the same cultural references. We all loved old Disney, and we all studied it, and everybody knew something that the other guy didn't know. So they were just we're teaching each other, like, and we'd go to the archives, which we called the morgue, but now it's called the Animation Resource Library. But the morgue used to be open to us, so we literally go and hold drawings that were created in 1940, and they won't let you do that anymore. But back
White gloves.
we weren't even wearing gloves. So you're just like literally flipping drawings by the 9 old men, and it was just insane. But we were all geeks. So
Okay, you win. You win. Don't worry.
no.
one thing that when I was looking at your resume of the Disney films in the Renaissance of Disney is almost everyone at this point has been made into a live action film. And I'm sorry. I just really wanted to know if you had any thoughts on that, what it's like to see these films, if you've even seen them. Because I know that one of the only ones I've caught was Beauty and the Beast, and I felt like it was almost an attempt at recreating it shot for shot for shot to the animated film. And I just wanted to know if you had any opinions on that.
And that's the only one I've seen is actually Beauty and the Beast.
Well, Lion King is literally shot for shot.
That's what
That's
I've
not even
heard.
live action,
And
It's not.
technically.
It's just a different animated one.
I mean, it's very surreal and odd. And on the one hand, we're kind of complimented that they think these movies should be repeated again. But one of the things that irks me the most, I'm okay with CG. It's not a big deal. It's just that the world has suddenly gone to this idea that photorealism is better than stylization. Mm-hmm. That the idea that, I'd much rather have a perfect photorealistic painting instead of a painting by Monet or Degas or Van Gogh, because that's not photorealistic. And when I look at what we were doing, we were trying to stylize our films. Aladdin was loosely based on Al Hirschfeld, if you know, the cartoonist in New York who used to do all the, you've seen it, beautiful, elegant caricatures of actors in theater. So he literally was 90 years old, and we had him come to the studio, and he did seminars with us, and it was just amazing. And you see Hercules was stylized under Gerald Scarfe, who's a cartoonist from England. And every movie had some basis to an art form and aesthetic that was unique. But none of it was photorealistic. Nobody was looking at, oh, let's get every single pore to show on the face, or let's get every hair. And, in the most realistic film we worked on was Pocahontas. And that one, we shot live action because the acting had to be so subtle, and most of us are not that good of an actor to pull off that level of subtlety. So we had actors create the performances for us, and then we would extract the information in our drawings. And that level of drawing was the highest draftsmanship that I'd ever had to deal with. It was almost illustrative, but it's still stylized. It's still not photorealistic. And I'm okay. You want to do a photorealistic film, that's great. I just don't understand why all of a sudden photorealism is the only language we understand and stylization has gone away. Anyway, we could wrap on that forever.
It's the same thing with my subject matter, right? Why have we moved away from adult-driven preschool shows in favor of animation that can be bought and sold throughout the world and just redubbed? Like, there's a different kind of value proposition when it's a real person talking to somebody else. It doesn't have to be replaced by the cheaper, quicker, better mentality.
Well, I don't know if animation's cheaper.
Than the half-hour program 5 days a week where they're shooting nonstop, and they can sell it to every single country around the world. Just all they have to do is dub, and then air it ad nauseum. It's why your films still, stand the test of time. Mr. Dressup is a little bit dated, and that's the concern.
It's charming.
I agree. Twist my arm.
Yeah, there's something that I find is lacking today is charm. Charm in art, charm in the writing, charm in, it's rare to see it anymore. Everything, and having said that, our short film probably lacked it too, because we were a little angry when we did it. But
may have gotten that, may have picked that up.
Yeah, but we weren't trying to appeal to that demographic. We were kind of trying to be a bit more abrasive. But it is something that I do find missing. And when you don't have it in your art, like charm and drawing and stylization and color and things like that. And I look at Mr. Dressup, and that's what it was. It was just sweet and charming and sincere, and it just communicated right to the heart of a child. I wish we could get more of that again.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
So what was your inspiration behind picking Mr. Dressup as the next film for you?
Well, the fact that my kids bought it instantly when they saw it without reservation. They're into SpongeBob and Paw Patrol and everything, but they sat down and watched an entire episode of Dressup without questioning it. So it wasn't just like, oh, Dad wants me to watch one of his shows again. Okay. Because that's what it is 90% of the time.
I was going to say, I feel like that probably happens often.
There's a huge pushback. They were instantly hooked, and just forget about it when the tickle trunk opens and they start dressing up. And, oh, we're on board, or the drawing segments. It's that sense of discovery of the show that just really inspired them. Like, every segment was about what's going to happen next, and how do we take all these different pieces and how is it going to come together, whether it's the craft, the drawing, the costumes. They were hooked. And then the fact that there wasn't a documentary ever done on it. And the Mr. Rogers documentary came out like a year and a half before. He's kind of like our Canadian Mr. Rogers. It just seemed to make a lot of sense. And it wasn't until I had everybody on board with interviews and I was about to go out and start doing it that people said, oh, no, you can't do that. Like, people have said it's impossible. People have been trying to do this for 20 years. And again, that's where I just turn down that volume and I just go ahead and just do my thing. And then you get so much steam after a certain point that it becomes a lot easier for people just to say yes than be resistant, because there are so many things working in its favor that you look like the odd one out now, where it's easier to say no and not take any risk whatsoever and put it to bed. Now you've got to say yes because, wow, I really need to be a part of this, which is exactly kind of what happened with this project.
Well, it seemed like there were a ton of people, sometimes very surprising people, that wanted to be a part of it. How did you find all those people to be a part of it?
We made a list and got a casting agent to contact their agents and stuff. And not a single person that we reached out to said no. It was just a matter of scheduling.
Other than the key cast of the show, who was your number one that you wanted to speak about Mr. Dressup?
Well, I mean, we looked at just basically any notable Canadians, right? So Michael J. Fox was high on that list. Wow. We had an invite to go out to Hawaii potentially for Jim Carrey, where he was there. Just couldn't line up that schedule. But they were saying, entertaining the idea of doing it. There was just a lot of people that wanted to be a part of it. Bare Naked Ladies were a great interview. Just a lot of people. Kids in the Hall guys were awesome.
Were you at all surprised how much feedback and praise and joy your film has gotten?
Oh yeah, every day. I'm surprised people showed up to watch it, right? It's great that you guys are here loving it, but I don't expect it, I mean, the creation process is such one in solitude for 90% of it. You're used to just doing it alone with a group of people in your secret treehouse in a forest. You're oh, we're having fun doing this. And you race to get there after school and you kind of leave. And then all of a sudden you start bringing a few people in to see what you're doing because people are wondering what's going on. And then at some point you're oh, a lot of people know about this thing and we're done doing the thing. It's oh, okay. And then you're kind of switching on to something else. At least that's how I am as a creator. I don't bask in whatever happens after. Before this went out anywhere, it was hey, I'm happy with it, stamp of approval. That was a good experience. In fact, I didn't expect any of the accolades that happened to this, to the point I was signing contracts to do other work that became very difficult to fulfill because it got into TIFF, and there was a ton of press. I signed to do a 13-episode series in May of 2023 and had to be delivered by October 1st. 13 episodes for 3 people essentially to make is really tough, and then to have weeks gone with press and preparation for a major film festival was a lot, and then flying to different places. It's a good problem.
Yeah.
But I don't think about what happens because the work is the work.
So when you actually meet the people who've seen the film, do they want to share their stories with you?
Oh yeah. They just need to talk to me about it. And I love it because what they are communicating to me is the same thing that I touched into every day that I worked on the film. The passion, the thing that resonated with me. Why do I love it so much? How is it a part of my life and who I am today? And they just want to communicate that back. So it's Dressup is not a show. It's a language that we speak to one another. And we just get it. If you watch Dressup and I say Mr. Dressup or that theme song, you get it, man. You don't have to explain it. You just, it's Jack Kirby. You know what Jack Kirby is. You know who Stan Lee is. Fleischer cartoons. You know what that is. It's just something that's so understood that you don't need to discuss it further. And it just kind of fills your heart and you just want to share it with the other person because it means so much to you and you don't mean so much to them.
Well, one of those people that wanted to share their story with you was Joe. But I stopped it because I wanted everybody to hear him share the story with you.
Oh.
So would you like to steer your Mr. Dressup story?
Just the same as everyone else. I mean, I was 9 years old when I moved to Canada and literally could only say 2 English words, yes and no. And I was thrown into grade 4 without any remedial help. But, television was sort of my go-to or comic books. And Mr. Dressup, strangely enough, was always there. And oh my God, I've already blanked the giant. Friendly Giant. Because I think they were back to back, weren't they?
For a while,
yeah,
probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was those were my little calm. I had no idea how stressed I was that as a 9, 10-year-old who didn't know how to communicate with anybody. But it was just, and watching him draw, that was, somebody was like blown away by that. And I thought, yeah, it is hard to take, a Sharpie and just do a drawing without an underdrawing that actually makes sense. So weirdly enough, I used to do it when my daughter was very young. I started doing a story time thing where I did the exact same thing. And I would tell a story by just drawing with a marker to the children. And maybe that came from Mr. Dressup, because subconsciously I must have pulled on that. But anyway, it was, those are the kind of things that you can't put a value on for immigrants who come to a place to find a friendly place on TV that is teaching them something. I must have learned something to help me, connect with everybody. But then comic books took over. So, and I think I was probably 10 years old is a little old for Mr. Dressup.
There's too old to dress up. Because when you're homesick in high school,
Yeah.
you put Mr. Dressup on, then you watch Bumper Stumpers and Price is Right. That's just Canadian.
Well, what about Romper Room?
Romper Room too.
Yeah, okay.
Supermarket Sweep might make it in there with Fred Penner,
Under the Umbrella Tree.
of course.
I think those were later for me. I don't know.
Yeah, you were animating at that point. Roger Rabbit was under the tree. How dare you not tune in?
So with this now, newfound, well, not newfound, but like refound enjoyment of Mr. Dressup, are you hearing things about people wanting to see other things like The Friendly Giant and Under the Umbrella Tree and Polka Dot Door? And
You mean like as documentaries or?
or just the TV shows in general? Like, where do you find them? Where can we watch them?
That's a good question. Where are the original episodes in media? And, one of the reasons everybody said, no, you can't do a Mr. Dressup documentary is the amount of legal entanglement tied up in the original archive stuff to just get access to put it in a documentary. You got to remember, these are contracts that by some people in some episodes were signed in the 60s before even syndication. They would shoot it and throw it away because we didn't preserve media whatsoever at all then. Sometimes episodes were kept on 2-inch kinescope tape, but a lot of the time it was not. And so when you don't have contracts that deal with reruns, let alone inclusion in other media like documentaries, it becomes very hard to access. And then you have, in a show like Mr. Dressup, because the music is live off the floor, you have musicians unions, you have directors unions, you have writers unions, and actors that all have to be paid different percentages depending on when the show and the episode you want to pull. So it's very hard for them to re-release these episodes. But if you want it, be vocal. If these things are important to you and important to the fabric of our culture, they are, then do it. I mean, think of how much history that CBC has created and all the shows that they've helped produce that is nowhere to be found simply because of legal documents are stopping them from being re-released.
Good to know. So who do we write to yell at them to get them out there?
Well, just be vocal about it. Just join all your different Facebook groups, all your different social media things. Be vocal about it. Say, where are these episodes? Write to CBC. Release episodes. It's worth it. We'll watch it.
One of the other things I wanted to ask you about, Joe, was the transition from animator to storyboard artist. Because the podcast I was listening to, you were kind of talking about everything moving into CGI and you kind of having to change and adapt. And we talked about my changing and adapting story earlier,
Right.
which you thought was a riot. But how did you make that decision and how did you enjoy the transition?
So by the year 2003, Disney had the last movie they were doing at the time was called Home on the Range, and I could tell that was it. There was no more hand-drawn animation because we always know 4 or 5 movies ahead what's coming, and there was nothing in sight, and things were really getting sad and toxic at the studio. People's contracts were no longer being renewed. People were being let go all over the place. It was just not a great time. So the chance to, when you would CG was it, that's going to come in and take over. And I tried it. I didn't like it. It was fine. I could do it, but it didn't give me the same buzz. So the other one was doing storyboards, which was still drawing, and you could tell a bigger story than what I did as an animator, where you only do, say, 7 or 8 seconds of a film. A storyboard artist would influence multiple minutes of the film. So that seemed like a really good transition. And I went to the studio execs and said, I want to move into that area. And they thought, oh, that's a good idea. Let's set up a training program. And I went through a 6-month training program, which I didn't really need to do, but I took it anyway. But and so, yeah, that's sort of how I transitioned to storyboarding. But I left the studio shortly after that and didn't storyboard. I told my buddy Jim, like, let's make a short film. So we took some time off before I went back into this into the workforce as a storyboard artist. And it was great for the next 20 years, but never quite as much joy with storyboarding as I had with animating. But it was a slightly different thing because you're thinking more as a writer, as a director, as a cameraman. I mean, there were so many other aspects of the art form that you're pulling on as a storyboard artist. But you also have to be a bit of a salesman because you have to pitch your boards. And that was something animators didn't do. You just showed your animation to the director and you stayed quiet. And they looked at your work and then we would discuss it. But if you tried to say something while he's looking at your work, like, yeah, I didn't do that yet, like I'm gonna get to it. They just see that as, oh, you're obviously not ready to show anything yet. So you always stay quiet. So as an animator, I was always much quieter. But the storyboard artists were much louder. They were always like, a room of writers. And, so I had to learn how to speak up and be heard in a room and pitch and all these things that I hadn't learned. So that no one really talks about when you become a storyboard artist. So it was a completely different culture to switch over. The drawing wasn't the problem. It was the ability to talk in a room that was kind of completely the antithesis of what I did as an animator. So where I let my work do the talking, as a storyboard artist, you have to do both. The work and your voice has to support it. So it was a bit of a performance act as well.
You did have a little bit of pitching experience, though, because you did pitch Hercules to the executives.
Yeah, I did a pitch fest when we were working on Aladdin. Jeffrey Katzenberg, who was the big executive at the time, opened the door to all of us and said, hey, anybody with an idea want to come in? So they had the massive pitch fest with over 40 of us in one room, and Michael Eisner, who was the CEO of the company back then, Jeffrey, and all the executives were sitting there. And I'd never pitched before. And they would draw your name out of a hat. You have 4 minutes to sort of pitch your idea. And the first guy who got called had a Greek mythology that he was pitching. And they were decimating him. It was just like, yeah, it's too big. How are you going to do it? Like, how are you going to contain it? And I just thought, oh my God, this guy's crashing and burning. I just need like 10 people between me and him before I go in with my Greek mythology. And then they pulled the name out and it was me. And I was like, livid. I mean, there's like 40 other people in the room. Why me? So I went into it with a really bad attitude, and I had a painting, and I kind of, I tried my best to pitch, and Jeffrey attacked me, and I just thought, oh, and I wasn't good at pitching. So I just fumbled my way through it. I finished my pitch. I sat down, and I thought that was a disaster, but we weren't allowed to leave the room. So it was a 2-hour or more thing. And they were just going person after person. I'm just sitting there going, I just want to leave. I want to leave. And I couldn't leave. And I just thought it was a disaster. And weeks later, we get a letter, and 5 projects were picked from that pitch fest, and mine was one of them. And I just thought, what? And I realized, oh, when they're yelling at you, they're engaged. When they're just listening and just writing notes, they're just thinking about, how much money they made today. they're not listening. I mean, they're disengaged. So I completely had it backwards, and that was a big lesson. So always kind of get them to engage with you and yell back. So, but that was way before I became a storyboard artist. So
I have a Katzenberg story.
oh no way.
He came to Sheridan in 2005, and it was just for the animation students, of course. He's head of DreamWorks at this point. Shrek 2 had been coming out at this point. And I was a film student, postgrad. I was not allowed in there. I snuck in there. I took somebody's badge that wasn't going to go there to show their credentials again, and I got in there. Got to ask the questions, the Q&A, and I had a pitch package that I brought with me because I have a script in here, I have storyboards, I have key art, and the question I asked is, where do you get your ideas from? Well, we'll take them from anywhere. Perfect. That's my end. Because I got the story from Shrek from my secretary. I'm like, okay, because I knew that story.
Oh.
So talk ends. He actually spills a Coca-Cola on himself when he opens it. It goes all over the place. Hilarious. Everybody's afraid to laugh. I laugh.
Diet Coke.
You're right, actually. That was a Diet Coke. He gets up. He doesn't leave the way he comes. They take him through these like utilidors, much like in Disney World, to get him out. I'm like, where's he going? He's not going to that parking lot. He's got to go to the one off Trafalgar because that's the only other exit. So I book it through all these. If you've ever seen Sheridan, it's kind of like this hodgepodge Lego-built school where there's all these ramps and stairs and stuff. And I go through, and I just catch him as he's going. And I said, Jeffrey Katzenberg. He turns around and goes, oh, you laughed at the Diet Coke. I said, yes, I did. And I said, you said you would take a pitch from anybody, right? He goes, yeah. I said, this is for you. Then he goes, I appreciate your tenacity. 3 weeks later, I get it back returned to me. We don't take unsolicited material, but there's a handwritten note saying, I appreciate the hustle. Let me know if you ever do anything in the future. Weird, but
that is what is great about Jeffrey. He was very difficult and very hard person, but he does appreciate people who stand up and do things. And as artists, we didn't. We were all very shy and kind of, some of us anyway, some of us weren't. But if you were gutsy enough to get up in front of him, he totally had more respect for you. So that stood you in good stead. I hope you kept the letter.
Oh yeah, that's DreamWorks postcard.
Nice. Yeah.
Do either of you have any projects coming up that you can tell us about?
Oh, I have a lot of ideas that I just kind of pulled back from working now, so I'm just starting to look at my future in a different light, and I am trying to develop projects, but one of them is this short that you just saw. Now that AI is sort of the new boogeyman in technology, we think this project is more relevant than ever before. So we've been developing it as a series, as a potential limited series for adults.
Cool. I have a series that I had 6 months to do 13 episodes that came out in Canada in November and just launched globally May 1st. So that's everywhere. It's called Planet Cool Stuff. It's all about the creators and the fandom and the passionate people behind comic books, video games, toys, movies, and music. Every episode has 4 segments that kind of looks at one of those different corners of pop culture goodness. And I'm in post-production on N64 Quest, the much long-awaited sequel to Nintendo Quest 10 years later. But instead of a 90-minute film, this is a 13-part series again, in which my good buddy Jay Bartlett has only 14 days to get all 296 N64 games with no online purchases. And instead of them being for his collection, we're raffling off everything in support of Alzheimer's and dementia research and support. Jay and myself have both been victims of Alzheimer's in our family and devastated by those things. So what better way to celebrate the past and try to preserve it through our passion and our fandom?
Sweet.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Do we have some Q&As that are going to go on?
Any questions?
I've got a microphone and we have questions.
Questions. So many questions.
Questions from everyone.
Where does it get those wonderful toys?
This is just so the online audience can hear your question.
Okay. Well, can they, is it just on there?
Yeah, so you just keep directing your question. It's just going to pick it up for online audience.
Hello. All right, so I gotta ask, so like you worked on like The Lion King and, what's the other one called? Was it Pocahontas? Yeah, Pocahontas. Like, How did you personally feel like when Disney like made the live action remakes of those movies like
Yeah,
years later?
We're not fans of it. So
Yeah, right.
yeah.
Yours is better, obviously. But.
The only one I watched was Beauty and the Beast because I was it was kind of like the first one that I was mildly interested in seeing.
Yeah.
How they, and I just, the whole thing just kind of felt very flat to me.
Fair enough.
And yeah, I'm not really interested in revisiting our films as live action films. Maybe down the road I will, when I'm really old, I'll just sit and watch it just for something to do. But now, it just seems like very low-hanging fruit to me. They're just looking for, but you know, as businessmen, I get it. It's an easy sell. So, but I wish they would do something a little bit more creative. Now I heard Hercules is going to be one of the next live-action remakes. So I'm curious to see how they're going to pull that off. If they go in a different direction and don't try to replicate the sensibility of the original film and maybe go more serious, which I think they did with Mulan. I haven't seen Mulan, the live-action film, but I heard that. So that could be interesting, but to just see it shot for shot done in live action.
I'm curious to know
Thank
why
you.
they skipped Pocahontas.
Weird.
Because it
Pocahontas
was
would
like
be the
boom,
most
boom,
obvious.
boom, boom, skip. It was
Yeah.
weird. Weird
It
vibe.
should, yeah. I mean, Pocahontas is so close to live action, so we, you know, that was something we were trying. Pocahontas and Hunchback of Notre Dame were two movies that were really experimental in that they were getting out of the sort of the child area and moving more into an adult area. And I thought both were like incredibly successful in many different ways, but in the box office returns, they weren't. So I'm not sure if they'll make those in live action, but they seem very obvious as a, if you really have to do this, those are good movies to pick.
We have a question from Luke Dickey online. What is your advice for making your pitch package stand out? I studied art, illustration, and live action film, but I'm working on a few pitches I'm imagining as animation.
It's all about animation.
Well,
But he's not the pitch guy.
yeah. You know, the pitch package is, it's so hard to know how to set it up. You're kind of directing right here. Your directing is beginning right now when you're creating a pitch deck for your project. So think like somebody who is going to watch your pitch deck and not know anything about it. So make it as entertaining as you could possibly make it without, you know, ramming too much information that you just overwhelm them with details. So just think about how to make it as entertaining as possible. And that's kind of like you're already thinking as a director. So tell the story, keep it brief, and if you have artwork, make sure your artwork really sells what you're trying to tell in tone or in, don't just put artwork in, because a lot of people do this. They just, oh, I'll just do what I've seen. You know, I'm going to show a character just standing there. This is what they look like from this side. Nobody cares. Throw artwork in that inspires the person. That when they look at it, they're going to go, "Damn, I want to see that movie." Like, even if it's not your artwork, like whatever, just grab something that looks so exciting that sort of reflects something about your idea. But there is no real, you know, step one, step two, step three, you know, process to this. It's got to come from you, and you better know what you want, and just entertain somebody with it. At least that's my experience.
Yeah, I would say if it's an actual deck, like a PDF, short, like 8 pages, like get to the core of it. And if you can, create a sizzle reel, because people will watch a 2-minute sizzle reel, probably less for animation if you can convey it in less than a minute, because it's way easier to sit and watch a minute of something that's great than flip through even 8 pages. People just want to hit a button and be entertained.
Yeah, I mean, any innovation you can come up with, like if you want to videotape yourself acting it out and just pitching it, and if you think that you're such a great salesman that you could do that, go for it.
And if you're not, find someone who is.
Right.
Seriously, yeah. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's
Exactly.
one of the things that producers do. Not all producers have a huge function, but some of them are really good at being a sales agent.
At the very least, they should be, yeah. And I'm a big believer in working in teams. A lot of people think that you got to learn everything yourself. I got to learn the camera. I got to learn this. I got to know Photoshop. Dude, forget it. I love just finding people who know that stuff and getting them into my team and seeing if we can do it together. I'm not a fan of being a one-man filmmaker. If that's just me, though. You?
I like working with people when I can. More
Yeah,
fun,
It's way more fun.
and the quality goes up.
Can we talk a little bit about that? What that's like? How you find those people? How you network, especially in in southwestern Ontario, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, finding people remains a challenge still, especially in a city like London, which isn't exactly a film mecca. There are people that go to Fanshawe and Western that have an interest, but 90% of the time they leave the city, which is very difficult to retain talent. You can hire people from Toronto, but there is a cost factor that is always the hardest thing. Who can you afford based on what they've done? Who can you help train and show the ropes to bring up to speed? Like, when is it good enough, and when can you innovate beyond that? Ultimately, though, because technology has made it easy for anybody to pick up a camera and do 80% of things, it's really that 20% that comes with experience. But if I'm working with someone, I just want to be able to tolerate their presence at the end of a 12-hour day or a 14-hour road trip. And there's a huge difference between someone you can and someone who you can't. So a good attitude and a good person will always win beyond a resume, all the time. So if you're a good person, then I would definitely work with you over someone who's got the greatest reel.
Right. That's a good point. I mean, I'm surrounded with people in LA, so I don't have to throw a rock too far to hit somebody. But it is, obviously, we have to be simpatico. There has to be some connection. I've done this multiple times with friends of mine. We'd just be having lunch and, dude, I have this idea. And it's like, yeah, that's a great idea. You want to work with me on it? Yeah, let's do it. It's just totally very high school. And we're just, recently the director of Beauty and the Beast and I, Kirk Wise, I had a book that I've had for years that I just thought would make a really good animated series or something. And we were having lunch, and I just said, I had the book with me, and I said, look, hey man, just read this. Tell me what you think, because it's been in my head for 20 years. And he called me the next day and said, I love this. We should do something with this. I said, you want to do something with me? Yeah, let's do it together. I mean, it's
No big deal.
It's that because we're all the same people. I mean, we're all just creative and want to do something, and both of us weren't working. So, but my buddy Jim that I made my short film with, we worked at Disney. We were both left Disney at the same time, and we were just talking. And I just said, look, we've worked for other people. We've made other people's movies forever. Do you want to make your own film? Do you just want to sit down and make your own film? Know what that feels like for a change? He said, yeah, we should do that. So I said, we discussed it, and I said, okay, let's do it together. But we're going to commit to this for 12 months. We're never going to get a job. We're going to make this our job. And we did that, and then we pulled in another friend to produce it. And the three of us just took the journey together. And I mean, that's as basic as it gets. Obviously, if you really are doing something that could take off, you better have a good written agreement with everybody, because later when there's money involved, people will get very oh my God, that was my idea. And so everybody, we knew what lane we were in. But initially, it just starts out like a couple of kids getting together and going, hey man, let's throw the ball around and just see, yeah, I want to play ball. You want to play ball? Let's play ball. Okay, let's go out and throw a ball around. And then, we screw around. So the one I did with Kirk, we didn't get the rights to the book, which was a big mistake. But we spent a month coming up with a whole series on this book. And when we both sort of felt like, oh my God, there's a lot of fertile material here for us, and we both love it, and we should really now go to the next step and get the rights. And we couldn't get the rights.
Yes.
No.
Yet. The rights lapse. Come back your way.
Well, the author would not let it go.
That's what happened with Mary Poppins too.
I was going to
Yeah.
say the same thing. I was like, P.L.
always
Travers
was.
did not want that movie made.
Sure, if you're Walt, you could. Yeah, I mean, I was so disappointed by that I just thought, I don't know if we'll go back to it. But we had a blast for about 6 weeks, just brainstorming it together. But anyway, that's a approach. It's not the approach.
I've got two. I'm going to go behind you and then I'll.
What are your thoughts on claymation? I really love claymation.
Stop motion. What do you
Stop
think?
motion is great, and Sarah, who sits behind you, knows that I'm talking to her about maybe collaborating on something. I think there's also a beautiful nexus between hand-drawn animation and stop motion that I haven't seen before, and it's something in my head that I'm really dying to try. But since I don't know anybody in stop motion other than Sarah, and I love her work, and we seem to get along, so we're gonna, talk about it. We're still dating.
And you'll do it here in London, right?
Oh, that would be awesome. I mean, I come here every time and I just think this place is just, it's like, it's ready. It's ready for something. It's ready to take off. It needs something. It probably needs an injection of money, but there certainly is this sort of grassroots feeling of creativity and artists here who could put together something that would be really innovative and interesting. The way Ireland did a place called Cartoon Saloon that did Book of Kells and a whole bunch of things, and they just innovated a whole different look and style. So anyway, it could happen.
Okay, so this question, I'm going to have to unpack it a bit, but it goes to the point that you were talking about stylization in art and your preference to stylization. And I find there's often a threshold where we operate through stylization and realism, right? And you have to kind of find that balance, like even in animation, I would assume, because the movements of the characters that you're drawing, they can't be too rigid and they can't be too overly stylized, or else it just doesn't look right. I suppose that both in filmmaking and in animation, it's a form of abstraction. So you take what we observe in life and you create an abstraction from the themes that we notice. Mm-hmm. And the abstraction becomes a real entity, right? So for instance, like something like Hamlet, right? It's an eternal story because the story itself tells something of the human condition as such. Therefore, it becomes more real than what we perceive as real. So I'm wondering today, those things are heavily linked to the things that you guys do as creatives, right? Do you find that we've lost our way in finding the abstractions in life, pulling those abstractions from life in either creating stories, movies, or like moving away from animation? Because you were saying how you guys were pushed to the brink of making really creative work with Roger Rabbit because of your limitations. Like, I often think that myself, I'm a painter, and I think my limitations are what kind of fuel my ability to make work,
Right. I mean, everything comes from your internal, sort of the internal engine in you, and it takes years to find it. And once you have it, you have to listen to it. But what I was talking about aesthetically is, I just thought in the 1950s and the earlier decades, people were a little bit more open to a cartoonier, stylized world, postmodern world, where things didn't have to look photorealistic for them to appreciate it. Somewhere in the last 20 years, I mean, we now have reality shows. It's just like the word reality seems to have a lot more currency to it than the word stylization, which is so weird because when we were at Disney, that was what everybody was looking for, is caricature, stylization. Yeah, we needed to create believability in the locomotion of a character. In Lion King, we spent a year, the studio put us through a year of training, learning animal locomotion, animal behavior, animal anatomy. But all of it was in the service of stylization. I mean, we weren't trying to replicate 100% what a lion looked like, because God knows they don't talk. So there, you have to kind of filter it through the artist's eye. And it's not that it isn't there today. There's a whole bunch of other ways that people are stylizing, how they edit movies. You know, the new Spider-Verse film, if you look at that, I mean, there's some insane things going on in that. But it's just, I find the value that people are not putting value on something that is a caricature versus something that is a photograph.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is retaining authenticity.
Yeah.
If you can be authentic and the world you're trying to portray and represent is authentic and consistent, then that's what matters. And sometimes that comes out through style, sometimes it comes out through subject. But people now more than ever, which is why reality is so important, we can detect BS. We're so good at detecting artifice from reality, which is why true crime goes through the roof, because we all want to be enamored by nonfiction, something that really happened. We can, and even within that, we can tell what parts are BS. We just have a very sensitive gauge, but if you're authentic and you commit to it, then we're sold. And it's hard to ignore.
I mean, when you're dealing with movies, it's a lot of money. So it's got to appeal to a lot of people. So people become very risk averse, and you know, if you're trying to do something, I think that's why like these movies are being remade about our movies, because it's so easy. It's so easy to sell. Let's redo Lion King again and again and again as a CG movie, or whatever, reality. So yeah, I mean, they'll put $200 million to make that. But, you know, the movie Wish, which was an original film, tanked, and that's $200 million down the tube. And so it's a big risk. You never know. But I prefer the risk versus the playing it too safe.
It seems like a big tug of war between the business and the vision. You know, like your vision might be authentic, but does it sell?
You can thank Jaws for that. That's when marketing took over in the 70s from studios. The artists got kicked out, marketing came in, and they're like, oh, we want more of that. And all the artists said, well, we can't do that. That's just luck. You know, sometimes you get your home run. And up to that point through the 70s, it was like the hits will cover the misses. But that's when you really start to see sequels coming in from Jaws onward. For risk-adverse marketing business people, not artists.
But then the cost of films went through the roof.
Because the more we spend, the more tickets we sell, right? Because it's a bigger thing.
There's that.
It's not true.
It's not true. But yeah, I mean, I think Lion King was made for, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 million, something like that. The average movie from Pixar, Disney, and all those places now is 200 million. So this idea that hand-drawn animation was more expensive, took more time, or whatever, is a complete fallacy. CG is exactly as expensive, or much more expensive. And the problem with technology is they keep moving the goalposts. So what you accepted this year, you will not accept 2 or 3 years from now. So they got to keep innovating. And then that's just more money, more money, more money. So it's a dark hole. But I want it to exist. I just want this other one to come up. I do want photographs, but I also want oil paintings. I don't want one to replace the other.
Of course.
Are there any other questions in the room? Yep. Looks like I have one more. Do you have one online?
I gotta get going. Pretty soon. I know. I gotta get going.
Thank you.
Hi, Joe. Just to follow up, I just had one question that I had to ask. So I was thinking, what's your favorite Walt Disney animated feature in terms of stylization? Like if you have a favorite of
So
all
many.
time. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I love a lot of the movies we worked on, but I love the older films. Sleeping Beauty is one that just is insanely beautiful to look at, and has that beautiful flat. It doesn't even pretend to be three-dimensional, and yet it is. But the art is so, just if you just look at it, the bushes, the trees, everything just has this beautiful. Ivan Earl, who is the production designer, just stylized everything in this just charming kind of boxes and shapes that were everywhere, and the color. I love that movie, but then I also do love The Incredibles that Brad Bird did. That one knocked me out. It was just like I'd never seen an animated movie like that before, where the action scenes, the characters, and everything rose to a level I had never really quite seen in even our movies. The complexity of that film, the innovation is just amazing. So there is a lot of great work. I mean, the Spider-Verse films are amazing. They're all breaking new ground. So I don't worry about CG animation. They seem to be trying a lot of fun and interesting things. The tragedy is that there's this amazing art form that is slowly dying, and nobody is coming to its rescue. And pretty soon there'll be nobody who knows how to do this lost art, and it will just fade into time. And people go, hey, that movie, Bambi, how did they do that? It looks like, are those drawings? Oh my God, people actually drew that? Like, that's insane. Like the way I would look at the statue of David and go, how the hell does anybody carve up into marble and create that?
With AI.
That's...
Yeah, we have one more question from the Zoom. This is from Luke, who thanked you for the previous question, by the way. And he has a final question. Do you know which age demographic you're aiming for when you start an idea, or do you have to develop a little more in the writing design process when you're creating a pitch deck?
You got to know your audience, for sure. You can't figure it out after the fact. You don't have to know right away, but before you pitch it and send it out, you better know who you're trying to rope in with your idea, who appeals to and why, and how everything you're doing within your project appeals to them. And the antecedents that you can say, well, these films are like this, and the comparables.
Yeah. You got to know your genre. If you're doing a horror film, you're obviously appealing to older audiences. So you better, you can't separate that from your pitch.
Great. So we're going to wrap up our night. Let's put our hands together and thank Whitney, Joe, and Rob.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.